stuff. You will never see this outside of my book because it comes from data that I've gathered. There are 3 types of Americans, okay? And they are, first and foremost, I don't know if you guys know, but 44% of Americans are essentially active, intrinsically active people. People who do things, people who get things done, people who have agendas, people who have intent, etc. 46% of Americans, by the way, you notice that these numbers are curiously close to 50-50. Okay? 46% of Americans are essentially inactive. They really don't do much. How do I know that? Go back and look at the last 10 presidential elections. And what will you find? 46% of Americans do not vote, don't get involved. So when we talk about elections, when we talk about all of these wonderful things that happen in America, 46% of the country is not there. Okay? And then there's 10% of Americans, and the 10% of Americans basically are reactive. So we've got people who do things because they believe in something. We've got people who don't do anything, and I'll explain it in more detail momentarily. And then 10% of American is the swing vote. Get them upset enough, and they side with either of these other two, and bang, you got the American system. I'll explain that at the end. That's what makes this country so much fun. But before I go any further, what I want to do is give you a sense of how these numbers come together. America is divided into 8 what I call culturographies. This came out of marketing research work, but eventually it was like, oh my gosh, this explains Americans in general. Okay? So I'm going to go through some of these very quickly, but I'm going to show you that the active types are advocates, sophisticates, conventionals, and mechanists. Advocates. Roughly 8% of Americans are natural-born advocates. An advocate is someone who believes something intensely, and they believe everyone else should believe exactly the same thing equally intensely. An advocate is a person who, if you do not believe in them, you're not simply wrong. You're obnoxiously wrong and rather stupid. So 8% of Americans are out there pushing whatever cause they want and don't want to hear a word against their cause. They fall on all sides of the spectrum. Another group of Americans are sophisticates. Oh, welcome to sophisticate land, America, here. People who have a relatively good life. They are involved in the political process because they feel they really should be, but on any given day, they may not be voting because they're in Cancun having a good time or whatever they want to have. So sophisticates basically will do the right thing. They're part of the process, but let's not, moderately so. There's a great line in Shangri-La. You ever read the book, The Lost Horizon? Chang, the master of Shangri-La, is asked by the Englishman, how does this place function? What makes Shangri-La keep people young forever? He says, moderation in all things, especially moderation. These are the kind of people, right? Be moderate. Conventionals. 9% of Americans are people who fit the old mold, the traditional American. Put off, don't aspire to anymore, you have to be very responsible. The Americans we talk about. 9%, 1 in 10. The best fun of all. 17% of Americans are what I call mechanists. Mechanists are people who will gain any system to their advantage. They will notice it immediately, and by the way, they're very inventive. America is a nation of inventors largely because this big portion of our population is mechanists. People who figure out how to find the advantage, find a new way of doing things. Mark Twain once observed that America is a nation of inventors. And if all we invented was personal liberty, that would have been great. But we didn't stop there. Okay? And then there's a group, so those are the actives groups. And then the inactives. The inactives are made up of 3 groups. Students. And I don't mean academic students. I don't mean high school students, college students, etc. I mean people who study things, who replace action with information. They study things. So these are the people who don't get to the polls because they're still reading the literature. These are the people who will think about something, but they won't actually make a decision. Consequently, they may have the best intentions, but they just don't get involved. Another group is what I call caretakers, and I don't mean somebody who takes care of other people. I mean somebody who feels like a caretaker in their own life, not fully involved. I will leave the world pretty much as I found it, but certainly not improved. I don't really go out of my way because I don't have the time, energy, or whatever. Okay, so caretakers are not fully engaged, not fully involved. And then my favorite group, indulgents. 18% of Americans are indulgents. When I first created this segmentation, I called them barbarians. My wife said, be kinder. Okay, so this is how I get around bringing them back to barbarians. 18% of Americans are indulgents. People who are having such a good time at something that matters more to them, they don't really care about anything else. These are the guys who, when you are at work, and when you were in your former positions, these guys were at the ballpark at a private box, and they were there Monday through Friday. By the way, they made about a tenth of what you made. But everything they had went into their pleasure, their joy, their enjoyment, the beer, etc. It's like the Budweiser generation almost. Only keeps on going every generation. Indulgents are just having too good a time to get involved in anything. And those are the three groups that, taken together, make up the 46% inactive. So what else do we have now? We have one more group, and those are the reactives. And the reactives basically are people who I call gradualists. Gradualists are people that will do something because a set of circumstances impels them to do it. And if those circumstances are not there, they won't do it. So these are the people who ultimately decide the fate of America. Because when you look at the political system, if 46% of Americans do not vote, 46% of Americans do not vote, here's the interesting thing. Regardless of the amount of registered Democrats versus registered Republicans, the number of members of each party who vote are roughly exactly the same. Pretty much almost exactly the same. So in a given election year, and this is only during the presidential election year, in a presidential election year, every Democrat vote cancels out every Republican vote. It's a total cancellation exercise. So the two political parties have how much power? Zero. Zero. Okay? The deciding vote, go back, study the elections. 5, 6, 4 points, 2, 3, 4 points, 5, 6, 1 point. Those points don't come from either of those political parties. Or if they do, they come from the people who are, as I said, gradualists. What does that mean? When was the last time you heard a president tell you that he has a mandate? Or even worse, America has spoken. Okay. Let's do the arithmetic on this one, because this is the parting shot I want to leave you with. If half of America doesn't vote, they're over here. The other half, remaining half, cancels each other out. And there's just this little swing vote that goes one way or the other. If they ally themselves with one party, then that party wins. What's the ultimate arithmetical exercise in which you should engage? The average American president, no matter what he tells you, is elected by a number of people such that 70% were not in favor of him or were actively against him at the time of his election. The majority of Americans were not in favor of or actively against every president we have ever had, with the possible, maybe George Washington. Maybe George Washington. We do not work as a consensus country. And in the final analysis, that's the greatest thing we have going for us. Because as long as that dynamic keeps swinging, we are dynamic people, we're going to be interesting people, we're going to be free people. When it falls hard on one side or the other, you pick it, then the game is over. So let there be dissension. Thank you. God bless you.